Alrighty, folks, welcome back to another 2024 presidential election prediction. According to the newest cutting edge polls coming from a multitude of different sources, let's get right into the content. Alrighty, folks, so first and foremost, we're going to give you a snapshot as to what happened about 4 years ago, as well, but the fact that we all know that we are about 4 months out from the election. In fact, 120 days exactly from Election Day, November 5th, 2024. As y'all can see right here, I'll take myself out the frame. You'll notice this is what it was last election, and we're going to compare it, of course. No matter how hard down a candidate may be, we can still guarantee the mass majority of the states to be completely in the aisle of one guy over the other. And so we're going to fill these out. Alrighty, so here we have basically what's solidified. This is what you can bet your mom's life on. So it's 172 Donald Trump to Biden's 166. Now, this is assuming that Joe Biden's the nominee and then Harris is the VP. Then Donald Trump, obviously, as of right now, does not have a vice presidential candidate on the ticket with him. And so that's coming up shortly. That being said, the polls that we're going to be using has Biden as the nominee. So that's why we're going to keep him in for now. Here's another snapshot so you have an idea as to what's going on. If we look at the general election, an aggregation of the polls shows on realclearpolling.com, we have Trump really leading Joe by 3.3%. In fact, when you look at the sidebar, look at the 15 polls that are on the screen right now, you'll notice that Trump is winning every single one, aside from one tie from Reuters Ipsos, which in and of itself I don't believe to be accurate. That being said, if you look at the snapshot in history, because we're looking at recent polling, you'll notice that the polling as of 4 years ago to this day will show that Joe Biden was leading with 8.7% of the popular vote. What that means for you guys is that there was basically a 12-point difference and a swing in the last 4 years in the polling. So that's a huge deal. So right now we're going to start off with the state of Florida. The state of Florida is realistically a state that's pretty similar to Texas. In fact, when you look at the outcomes of the last election, you'll notice that Texas went 5.6 for Trump in an election where he lost the popular vote by about 4 to 5. And so that's a positive plus 10. And so when you take into consideration the fact that Trump is up at all, it means obviously that Texas would be Republican. So we've got that locked down. Now with with Florida, it was closer. It was only a 3.4% victory for Donald Trump. But given the fact that if we look at the most recent polling, Donald Trump is up by about 6 percentage points. If you look back a couple days past the most recent one, you'll notice that as of last month, Trump was up by 10, 4, 6, 6, and 5. And so it's pretty indicative of a massive win, more than in 2020. Does it have to be a landslide in the state? Not really, but by relative terms, it totally is. When you think about it, 24 years ago, almost to the day, we had a huge issue with hanging chads and about 500 votes in a state of millions of people. Now we have such a decisive victory for Donald Trump in the polling that could never even occur in a hypothetical because there is no contestant. There's no real contesting of the state really by the Democratic Party. They've all but disavowed running in that state. And what I mean is that they've basically divested any money they were putting in Florida the past 8 years and putting it towards places like Michigan and even Virginia nowadays. So let's move on. So Ohio is pretty enigmatic in an election where Trump won in 2016, as well as lost in 2020. We saw that Trump still won by about the same amount in both elections. In fact, when you look at it, Ohio voted 8 points for Donald Trump in 2020. Again, that's at the face of him losing the popular vote by about 4. So that's voting to the right of the country by 12. We have Trump up by 3 in average. And so that's a positive 15 or something like that. That being said, let's look at the polls. Trump is leading in the most recent poll as of last month by about 7. Now, here's the thing. The polls aren't so recent with Ohio because kind of similar to Florida, it's so obvious that it's going Republican that Democrats and other Republicans are just not putting in their money towards polling Ohio. Instead, they would rather get more frequent analysis over the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, etc. And so that's probably explaining why. If we look at the whole history, though, we see that Trump's up by 11, etc. And so it's in line with a Trump victory of about, I would personally say, 10. Even the most recent poll, like I said, has him up by 7. Even if you look at Kennedy's vote share, which is due to decrease over time, he's only at 5%. And so the third party doesn't really make a difference in the polling there. So there we go. We're going to move on to another state. If we look at the state of North Carolina, you'll notice that Trump was up by 1.3. 1.3 is interesting because, again, he lost the election by 4.5. And so that's a positive 5.8 differential. Now, noted here is the fact that when we look at the polling, you'll see that the most recent sample has Morning Consult putting Trump over Biden by 3% head-to-head. You add RFK into the sample, and it hurts Trump slightly, and he's down to 2% of a win total. If we look at the prior samplings from 3 weeks prior to it, we have Trump by 3, 8, and 4. And so that's an average of about Trump plus 5.5 if you were to add it all and divide it. So basically, your median number here for North Carolina as of recently is about 5 percentage points of a victory. That being said, when it comes down to it, Trump in the most recent poll is up by 3. So it's a win regardless of how you cut it. And so there you go, 235 to 166. It's looking very favorable for Donald Trump, but let's add some Biden states. We are going to quickly look into New Mexico. New Mexico is interesting for a myriad of different reasons. New Mexico went for Biden by 11 percentage points in 2020, believe it or not. And this is going to be really big when I explain why this is notable. Now, so as you can see here, Joe gets about 10.8% over Trump. Massive, massive win. Now, let's move on to the most recent polling. You look at New Mexico and you'll notice that Joe Biden is basically only winning by 2 to 1% with a 5-man race over here, or 6-person race over at the 1892 polling and the NRSC. And so that is interesting to note, obviously. But I will elaborate on a couple of different things here. So first of all, this polling is about 2 to 3 weeks old. The second thing I want to point out for y'all is that this is a Republican-sponsored poll. This is sponsored by Nila Domenici, who is the daughter of a prominent senator in that area. Obviously, in the past, we also have the Republican Party internal poll as being a functionary here too. And so it's a little difficult to say whether or not you would really lend credence to it. Now, if we look at the polling that is a little less subjective, we do have the public policy polling. So PPP right here has Biden up by 7, which is more in line with historical trends, obviously. But we can look even further past, and you'll notice that the polling has been not really existent. We did obviously have Trump leading in the polls as of the last several weeks. And so we do have some polling as of maybe June 14th. But when we look at the most recent stuff as of this month, basically, you'll notice that, again, it's Republican funded. And so we'll have a moderate poster saying that, you know, Trump is losing by 7, and then the Trump polls basically saying that he's only down by 1. We can average that out to a Trump losing by like 3, which is notable for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, if, you know, Biden won this by 11 and he's only winning it by a couple points this time around, it's a really pathetic showing, because if he's losing 8% in New Mexico, God knows how much he's losing out of the Rust Belt states, or what we call the blue wall back in the day. And so basically we have Colorado up next. So as a reminder for you guys watching, Colorado went for Biden by 13.5%. So that's a ton when you really look at it. Remember, in 2016, Trump used to rally in Colorado, not too heavily, but he still considered it an outside chance of him winning the state. And so imagine that. And then in 2020, he basically just dropped it like a wet rag, because it was just kind of disgusting to think about, even wasting your time and effort in a state that was so Democratic by the time his reelection campaign came around. And so, yeah, Joe won it by about 14 points in 2020. But when we move on to the more recent polling, you'll notice that as of about a month ago, that we really have a ton of polls that are having to do with the House races, like Lauren Boebert's, but we're looking for presidential stuff. So this is a really difficult job for me to do, is to find you the most recent polling insofar as Colorado is concerned. The best you have on 538.com is going to have to do with this Colorado Polling Institute poll, which is about 4 months old and has Biden up by 10. This is not really representative of the race at all. As we saw in New Mexico, Trump was doing 8 points better on average than the last election. Now, we look at another more obscure website like The Hill, in which case we do have, again, the approval rating for Joe as of about 5 weeks ago to be pretty sour. In fact, he's down -20 on average. Now, let's look into the most recent poll. This is a pretty small one by John Zogby. This was a 500-person poll. We like to have 4 digits in ours, but anyway, the point being is that this one we'll have to do. The most recent one, again, is about 2 months old, and we have Biden up by only 6. And so it's only has gotten worse. Obviously, Trump went by late. He was winning the popular vote by about half a point before the debate. Disaster for Joe. And so he's up about 3% since then. And so with common sense, we could deduce that Biden's probably winning 4% less than that 6. And so he's probably winning Colorado by like 2 to 4, which is more in line with where it was as a state in 2012. Remember, Mitt Romney was contesting places like Colorado, places like Virginia. And so that all kind of checks out. So to spit some game on y'all, let me just tell you, when it comes down to it, why it's important to really get into the details about these two states in the Rocky Mountain region. Why it's so important really has to do with a couple of different things. Chief among them being is that while Trump probably won't win these, even in a bad scenario for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, the truth is that if they have to divert resources to states like Colorado and New Mexico, which nobody thought would have been contested a couple years ago, that means that they have to stretch themselves thinner than they already are, and they're already losing. This is basically tantamount to a Normandy beach invasion where the Germans were already losing to the Soviets long term, and then you add in another front, and God knows how bad that turned out in real life. And so really, as a metaphor, we have Biden in a bunker, and the Steiner counteroffensive might end up being on Colorado ground. Okay, think about that. You would have thought a couple months ago that the election would have came down to Detroit. It would have came down to Milwaukee or Philadelphia, but it may go down to Denver. Think about it that way. So let's look to Georgia. As we all know, in 2016, Trump won Georgia more or less like he did Arizona, like 3 to 5 percentage points. Now in 2020, things kind of went crazy. You saw that Georgia went to Biden by 0.24. Obviously, there were shenanigans, but to be honest, it just basically ends up, what matters is the official count and not so much what the truth about it is, because obviously 4 years ago, look how that worked out for Donald Trump. And so let's kind of keep a sober mind and just for the sake of the argument, just take it at face value that Joe Biden narrowly won the state of Georgia. Well, let's look into the more recent polling. If you look into it, we have as recently as last 4th of July weekend, basically, we have the morning consult with Trump winning by 1 or 2. This is huge because these are the most liberal sort of pollsters is Bloomberg and Morning Consult, maybe Ipsos and Reuters, but these are certainly slanted against Donald Trump. And when you look at it, you'll go maybe 2 weeks prior to that polling, and you'll notice that as of June 20th, you have Georgia going to Trump by 5 points or 10 points, according to P2 Insights and University of Georgia School of Public and International Affairs. Obviously, this Building America's Future is a Republican poll, and so that it kind of explains the 10-point victory for Donald Trump, which I do not foresee personally. Emerson is a little more down the middle when it comes to, the Republican-funded polls and the liberally slanted ones, which is a lot of them. Emerson is kind of in the middle there. Sponsored by The Hill, of course. We have 1,000 respondents for Emerson. Emerson has Trump winning the state by 8 to 5 percentage points, depending on how many candidates are on the ballot. Trump 52 to Biden 48 seems completely kosher with me, though, and so I think that's pretty much the most representative notion for this upcoming election. Again, the most recent polling has Trump up by 2 or 1. But again, Morning Consult is very anti-Trump when you really look at it. And to be completely clear, if Trump is doing 7 or 8% better in the popular vote, then how the hell is he only going to improve by 1 percentage point in the state of Georgia? It literally does not make sense. So the Bloomberg can be thrown into the garbage bin because it really does not check out. So I would probably predict that Georgia goes about 5% Republican if I had to guess. Now, Nevada is certainly interesting for a couple key reasons. Nevada is a state that went 2.4% for Biden in 2020, which is a win for him. But keep in mind that Trump, again, performed pretty bad popular vote-wise. And so actually Nevada voted 2 to 3 percentage points more conservative than did the country as a whole, if that makes sense. So it's more conservative than the average American vote, if that makes sense in your head. Anyhow, the polling nowadays is a completely different story. You have Nevada going to Trump in the most recent polling as of 3 days ago by 3%. Or if you add other candidates, Trump is winning by 6. Now, again, this is Morning Consult, who is in my opinion, the worst pollster just off the top of my head. Now, if you look at other polling as of last week or less than a week ago, you'll notice that National Public Affairs, with a larger sample size, by the way, basically has Trump winning by 9 or 10 percentage points. Huge victories writ large. So that's really notable. So that's very, very, very good for Donald Trump. So he's doing about 8 points better in Nevada than he did in 2020, which kind of checks out, obviously, given the fact that he's 8 points better off in New Mexico and not dissimilar, in my estimations, to Colorado as well. This is, again, important because Nevada wasn't really a state that Democrats thought would have been an issue for them in this upcoming election, and definitely not in 2020. So for it to have trended right over the past several years since the Obama second term ended, what that basically means for the Democrats is that, again, they have to spread themselves thinner than usual. So think about it. The calculus is really special. We have Florida locked in for the Republicans, Ohio locked in, we have North Carolina basically locked in, Iowa locked in, and now the Democrats have less opportunities to kind of win. Now we look to the state of Arizona. Trump won my state by 0.31. Psych. It was Biden that won. I misread that. Okay, so Joe Biden narrowly won the state, but we do have some comparisons to make here. So here we have the polls. As you guys know, if Trump lost the popular vote by 4.5 and he lost Arizona by 0.3, that means that Arizona is 4 points more conservative than the expectations were, which means if you were to put that into 2024, which is not a stretch to do, then you would have Trump's 3-point lead in the popular vote, as I'm showing you right now. And you really put 3 plus 4, and then you have a 7-point lead. Mentally, that's what you need to operate off of. But let's see how the polls reflect that. And what do you see? Well, look, according to Morning Consult, which, like I said before, is pretty liberal, you have in the past week Trump up by 3 in a 1v1. And if you have Kennedy, West, Stein, and Oliver on the ballot, you have Trump up by 7. Now, Arizona is a state that already permitted the 5 candidates to already get on the ballot. I think those 5 would be Trump, Biden, Kennedy, West, and Stein. Now, what's interesting about this is that Biden, West, and Stein and Kennedy are all liberal candidates. And so, it'd be one thing if you added third-party candidates down the ballot that were conservative, like a Patriot Party, Conservative Party, make up whatever you want in your head. That would actually take votes from Donald Trump, not dissimilar to Evan McMullen in 2016. But when it comes down to it, Joe Biden has to contend with Kennedy, who is a liberal, who's maybe conservative on the jab question, and that's about it. Or you have Cornel West, who is a black Bernie Sanders from what I read. And then you have Jill Stein, who's like a green New Deal type chick. And so that's not great. And she's pro-Palestine or something like that. And so that's also going to take some youth votes in Arizona away from Biden. And then Oliver is a liberal libertarian, basically, like a socially liberal guy. So that's not going to hurt Trump in the slightest. And so this 7 percentage point marker seems pretty accurate. We also have polling as of last month that's also pretty positive. Trump plus 11, plus 6, plus 10. And so Trump plus 7, in my opinion, seems like the most accurate, and it's the most recent outcome. So, rare Morning Consult W right there. So there you go. So for the sake of being thorough, we're going to look into New Jersey. Now, if you would have told me a couple months ago, hey, we should contest New Jersey, I would have been like, dude, what? Like, are you smoking crack? Are you Hunter Biden? And then, low key, when we look at the polls, you might be surprised. So if we look into the state of New Jersey, we have some pretty surprising results. Let's compare that, obviously, to what we have in the past election. You saw that Joe Biden won the state of New Jersey by 16 points. So that is not very promising for Donald Trump, but let's compare what the numbers are saying now. The most recent poll by Coefficient, which I've never heard of actually, has Joe Biden losing to Donald Trump in a 3-man race by 1 point. That's very interesting. Now, when we look into the election insofar as we're looking at the general, we do have Biden leading. Let me see. All right, so here we go. When it comes down to it, Emerson, as of 4 months ago, had Joe Biden beating Trump by 6 in a 1v1, and where Kennedy's involved, he's beating Trump by 5. Now, let's compare that to the popular vote, and you'll notice that if we go back to, let's say, late March of 2024, that takes us all the way back to about here. Okay, so as you guys can see, when the poll was done, Trump was leading the popular vote by about 1 percentage point, okay? So Trump is leading by 3.3. That's a 2.3% difference. And so Joe Biden leading by 5, then you minus 2.3 because Trump is 2.3 points better off since that debate that happened in the past week. What that basically means for you guys is that Biden would be winning New Jersey by 2.7 percentage points, I think. So that's pretty much in line with my expectation. So that's still a win for Joe Biden, but it's super close at that point, obviously. Now, there's going to be more recent polling coming up shortly as we obviously see some outlying stats that show that Trump might be in contention for the state of New Jersey. Also keep in mind, of course, that my math is not perfect, but it's pretty spot on just based off of what I hear myself talk about. But also, when you look at it, for Trump to be this close to winning New Jersey is still remarkable because, again, he lost it by 16 points. And so for it to swing, let's say 12% in one election cycle is absolutely fantastic news for the incumbent president from the last term. So Maine is also an interesting little outlier state. It most likely will not matter at all in the final outcome of the election, but let's be thorough like I like to be. So we do have a couple of different loose ends. So obviously the rural district in Maine, that's how the Electoral College works, is that it's considered its own vote. That's clearly going Republican. But we have a question as to the first district, which will obviously be like the Portland area. You can basically just deduce that as being its own little enclave as to being liberal. That being said, we do have a bigger question at hand when it comes to the at-large district. So this is also pretty similar to the layout in Nebraska. And so we do have similar questions as to how do these particular districts work out. And so let's look into the polling, which again is not very saturated due to the fact that Maine is not really invested in any regard politically. But looking into it, digital research with pretty small polls have the state of Maine as of months ago, 100 days ago, basically, going Trump down by 2, Trump up by 1 by 1. And so even as well, Trump by 1. And so we have a flurry of polls. You can aggregate this result to be about dead even, a dead heat even. And so it's a very difficult thing to parse through, but let's use some common head math, okay? So obviously this poll's old, but this is the only thing we can work with. So looking into it, we all know that this could be really close. So when you take the state in its entirety as of 2020, we saw that Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 9 percentage points. Now, this is very curious, of course, because Biden won the national vote by 4.5, and then we have Trump winning it now by 3.3. So that's a difference of 7.8. So 7.8 minus 9 is 1.2. So that means that Biden is ahead of Trump using my head math by 1.2. So it's a difficult thing to say whether or not Trump would win in that scenario. But if we look at 2016, you'll notice that Hillary only beat Trump in Maine by 3 points, despite winning the popular vote by 2-ish percentage points. And so what that basically meant for you guys is that Maine was only 1 point more liberal than the entire country aggregated together, whereas in 2020, it was about 5% more liberal. And so it has an elasticity, which is not dissimilar from the trends we'll look into New Hampshire next. And so with that being said, it's a difficult thing to parse through whether or not Trump would actually win the at-large district, but like the video if you want to see the actual answer. Assuming you like the video, like the good fans you are, we're going to move on. So obviously we do have April 30th as the benchmark. Okay, so let's look back to the popular vote percentage as of April 30th. If you look into late April of this year, you'll notice that Trump was winning the popular vote by anywhere from 1 to 1.5. And so that's about a 2-point difference from what we have today. So we're working with an electorate that is 2 points to the right of when this last poll was done. And so according to the latest polls, Maine would most likely be a win for Donald Trump at large, which is a huge thing as compared to 2020. Now, we do have Trump already winning the election, but we do have several more states to talk about. So taking a quick pit stop at the Nebraska 2nd District, you'll notice that Joe Biden won that thing by 6.6%. So Omaha, Nebraska went liberal. Now, let's compare that, obviously, to what we're working with today. So there's not really polling on this matter, but instead we can rely on my math. Like I said before, Nebraska 2nd District went 6.6% for Joe, like I just said. Now let's compare that to the popular vote differential, and let's put that in my mental calculator and do that. So basically, when we compare the 2nd District to the country at large, we see that the 2nd District went about 2% more Democrat than did the country. What that means for you guys is that we need to subtract 2% from Trump's popular vote victory right now, which is 3.3, and you end up with a victory in Nebraska 2nd District of about 1.1 percentage points. And so that is a W for Donald Trump right there. So let's add that in. Okay, so now we do have a couple more states to address. So like I told you, the next state we're going to talk about is going to be New Hampshire. As you guys can see, when it comes down to New Hampshire in 2020, Trump lost it by 7.4%, which is huge. It was disproportionately Democratic, really, when you look at it. But when we do look at the polls, we do see a very healthy sized sample right here of 1,700. And we have June 29th is the most recent one, where St. Allison's College Survey Center has Biden losing to Trump by 2. This includes Kennedy at a small vote share, Stein at 1, West at 1, Oliver at nothing, where he deserves to be. And so that's the most recent poll. Now, granted, we look past it a little before, obviously, and we see that Biden was up by 4, 3, and even in these 3 polls as of May. But this is the only poll that was post-presidential debate. And so as of right now, Trump is actually up by 2. So that's a miracle. Like I said, that's a 9% difference, really, when we compare that to 2020. And so that's huge. When we look at Virginia, we do have some conflicting narratives coming up, okay? So when it comes down to it, we look at what happened in 2020. Joe won it by a little over 10 percentage points. Now, this is notable because Biden's lead in the aggregate right now is 2.2. But according to the gimmick of the video, it's according to the latest poll. And we have Roanoke College as well as Fox News both having a tie for the most recent polling, which, again, Fox News technically is the most updated. That is as of June 4th. And so that's over a month ago, actually, that it was tied. Now, this is notable for a couple different reasons. the number one thing for you guys to understand is that obviously Joe Biden has lost a couple points ever since the debate has happened. And this was prior to the debate, by about 4 weeks. And so really, when we're looking at it, Joe is probably going to lose the state by about 2 to 3, according to this most recent polling. Obviously, that's if the election were held today, things could tighten up later on, but that's just the obvious truth right there. Minnesota was polled a couple weeks ago, and we have Emerson with Trump up by 1 when you include the candidates that will be on the ballot, basically. And then in a 1v1, for whatever reason, Biden's winning by 2. This obviously doesn't check out because that would be a 3-point difference with a 1-to-1 versus a 3-man race. And it just doesn't work out that way. When you add Kennedy, it shouldn't sway more than 1 or 2 percentage points. So for it to be 3 points off is definitely a stretch, to say the least. And so that's very notable. Now, this is still a pretty positive outlook when you look at it, because we do have Biden winning by a ton more in most of these polls. Obviously, you have this blotch of Republican-sponsored ones where Trump is winning, but we do not take those seriously because they tend to be biased. And so we have that most recent result. And this is notable for a few reasons. Now, we do have Minnesota going to Biden by 7 points. And so for it to be contested at all is pretty notable for Donald Trump. And so, yes, I do believe this most recent polling is to be accurate, that he will win it by, let's say, 1. And so that's going to be pretty much not a lock, but pretty good odds that Trump will win the state of Minnesota. Moving on to its neighbor in Wisconsin. Here we have July 5th morning consult, Trump losing by 3 to Biden. Again, this is not really accurate at all. It's not accurate at all. Obviously, there's no way that Trump could be up by 2 in New Hampshire, tied in Virginia, but also losing Wisconsin by 3. It just literally doesn't make sense. Guys, do not forget that I think NBC News polls had Biden up by 17 in Wisconsin 4 years ago one time, and it's just like appallingly stupid. And so Wisconsin, for whatever reason, has very odd polling. That being said, we do have polling as of last month that has different results. Obviously, we have Marquette University of Law School, or whatever it is, Trump up by 2, 3, down by 2, even, +3. And so these are somewhat all over the place. When it comes down to it, though, SoCal Research does have Trump up by 1, and I tend to believe this a lot more. I do trust on point politics way more than Morning Consult. I just think Morning Consult ought not even be a thing that I consider in these videos. Comment down below if you disagree, but Morning Consult is on crack. There's no way that Trump is leading by 3 points in the popular vote and then all of a sudden be down by 3 in Wisconsin, when we all know that Wisconsin voted to the right of the country in 2020. Why the hell would it vote like 7 points to the left of the country now? It's not mathematically true. So we're going to stick with the SoCal on point politics poll and just have that as a red Wisconsin, okay? Executive decision, I know it. It's presidential. I got to shut this down, okay? I got to veto some of these bills in these polls. They're stupid. Now, Michigan went to Biden by 2.8% in 2020. So it voted 2 points to the left of Wisconsin. This is interesting for a couple of different factors, but let's look into it. When it comes down to the polling, we have Bloomberg, again, with some ice cold polling. As of a couple days ago, they have Biden up by 5. Again, give me whatever method they're on, because this is just insane. This just is not accurate. But let's look a couple weeks back and see what the most recent polling has it from that juncture. We have Trump up by 4 in both scenarios where Kennedy's on the ballot, or if it's a 1v1. The polling is not great. Epic MRA is not really known, and it's only 600 contestants or respondents, which is not perfect. You would like a Michigan-sized state to have over 1,000, but that's what we're dealing with. Now, Emerson is also pretty reputable, and it has Trump up by 1 and 2. And so I tend to believe those polls way more than I do Bloomberg and Morning Consult, obviously. Also note that Trump, so basically Michigan voted 2 points to the right of the national vote share. Therefore, if you put that logic, basically we have Trump up by 3. And so you add 2 to 3.3, and then that's a 5-point victory for Donald Trump. And so any poll that has Biden winning clearly is not sensing the pulse of the country. And again, when we look at the national aggregate, it takes in polls from all different sectors. It takes in Wall Street Journal, Yahoo, Harvard, Harris, CNN. These are not right-wing sort of pollsters for the most part. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So for anybody to say like, oh my God, Trump's going to lose the Rust Belt, like on what basis? Like seriously, it's just asinine. And so let's go to the last state, and potentially the most important state, some would say the tipping point really, and it's going to be Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state that Joe Biden won by 1.2 percentage points. So it voted 3 points to the right of the country overall. So let's look into how that reflects. So y'all notice that Pennsylvania is going to Trump, even according to Morning Consult, by 7, and then 3 if you add Kennedy. Now, again, I'm just dunking on Morning Consult. I might title this the Morning Consult roast because it is just so mathematically incorrect for them to think that Joe is winning Michigan by 5 and then losing Pennsylvania by 7. Now, let me just explain to you guys. Do you guys, honest to God, think that there's going to be a 12% difference in voting between Pennsylvania and Michigan? It doesn't make sense. In 2016 and in 2020, Michigan and Pennsylvania were within 3 percentage points of each other in both elections. It doesn't make sense for there to be a 12-point difference. In fact, when you look at a 12-point difference, you would likely be looking at maybe Texas versus Alabama insofar as like the difference in voting percentages, okay? A 12-point difference is just asinine between the state of Pennsylvania and Michigan. It just literally does not mathematically check out. I mean, it'd be like comparing a state maybe like North Carolina to a state like Virginia, okay? It's just, it's hokey pokey. Anyway, let's season this by adding in some more polling. We do have Signal as of 2 weeks ago that has Trump up by 4 in both scenarios. And then we would have to look over a month ago, basically, to look at Bullfinch, who nobody's ever heard of, and it has Biden up by 1. So, yeah, the most recent polling, even according to these horrible garbage polls, still have Trump up by 7. So, I mean, it's pretty clear just using head math that if it voted 3 points to the right of the country last time, that if Trump's up by 3, that it should go about 6 points for Donald Trump. And so that's just pretty clear. And so right now we're working off the basis of Trump winning 342 electoral votes to Biden's 196. He's likely to win the popular vote by several million. In fact, maybe by like 6 million votes, just mathematically, because I think Joe won 7 and he got 4%. So anyway, that's the final result. Like the video if you did like it. These are very time consuming to make and they're somewhat tedious, but I like my little nuances because I kind of add more than anybody else, my humble opinion. Comment down below any constructive criticism you have or any hostile stuff too, because you know what? I'm all game. And so comment down below what you thought. Like the video if you really did enjoy it, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Adios.